Who do you trust to ensure that you and your family will get ahead? You can trust Ontario's Liberals to do more for you and to get it right.
We have the power of our vote to make real change. You have the power through your vote to fight rising costs with a grocery rebate program.
You have a historic opportunity to send a message to Doug Ford and the Conservative Party that you cannot take rural Ontario for granted.
Will this be your last provincial election?
Boy, you're asking a question. Man, I want to be Premier forever. You know, I want to beat out Hazel McCallion with a number of years. God bless Hazel.
All four provincial political party leaders there today on this last day of campaigning in Ontario. The election happens tomorrow. Let's talk about that with the front bench. Dan Moulton, Jamie Ellerton, Shannon Phillips, and Hannah Thibodeau are back. And Dan, we're going to note, is advising Ontario Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie just for full transparency. Jamie, I did want to start with you. Do you think Doug Ford tomorrow will end up with the ballot box question he wanted?
I don't know if he's going to end up with the ballot box question he wanted, but I do think he's going to come out with the result he wanted. I think when you look at how this campaign has shifted, this really has kind of been a non-event. I've talked to some Liberals who are campaigning here in Toronto, and there's more interest truly in talking about Mark Carney in the federal leadership race than what's going on with this actual provincial election. I think when you look at how Doug Ford has built his electoral coalition and really brought blue-collar private sector unions into the progressive conservative fold here in Ontario, he's kind of recreated the big blue machine that has been the things of folklore and people talk about in Ontario politics. I think the real thing to watch tomorrow is whether or not Bonnie Crombie is able to eclipse Merritt Stiles as either leader of the opposition or at least cling the Liberal Party back to official party status in the legislature.
The ballot box question that Doug Ford wanted, Shannon, was about responding to Trump, right? And that was the reason that he gave for calling this election more than a year in advance of when it was scheduled, that he needed a stronger mandate, he said, in order to be able to respond to Trump. What are the broader takeaways? Like if we look to the federal stage and other potential elections that could be, as Hannah said, weeks away, of that pitch?
Well, I think the extent to which Trump has upended Canadian politics cannot be overstated here. Just 6 months ago, you know, in the BC election and elsewhere, we were talking about people's rage at the incumbents. And now we are talking about how incumbents can be the ones to meet the moment and actually meet the challenges that Trump poses. There are some really serious issues before voters in Ontario right now: healthcare, education, the Greenbelt scandal. But the opposition parties haven't been able to get any traction on any of them. It has been all Trump, all the time, all tariffs, and Doug Ford has played it masterfully with respect to the support for private sector unions, for keeping the focus, in as much as he's kept the focus on anything, it's been on that. He's limited his media appearances. He's done everything that a front runner really should do in order to get the result that he wants. The question is going to be who is official opposition and what happens to the New Democrats after this election. I think that 4 years of quite a bit of caucus turmoil is actually showing up in some of the weakness now. It's Marit has done her level best, but she had a lot of turmoil in that caucus, and it just goes to show you that, you know, the opponent can only do so much to you. It's nowhere near as bad as what you can do to yourself.
Dan, I wanted to ask you about the stakes for the opposition parties in this election and also the strategy that they employ. Just jumping off of what Shannon said, you know, Doug Ford obviously wanted this to be about Donald Trump. The opposition parties, and you can correct me if my impression is wrong, I think, you know, were doing their best to highlight all the other issues that were more problematic, you know, around ethics in the Greenbelt and healthcare in particular, which is a huge issue for Ontarians and really Canadians right across the country. Was that strategically an error? Should they have been talking more about Donald Trump? And ultimately, what do you think the stakes tomorrow are for them?
No, it would have been a very poor political choice for the opposition parties to focus this election on the question that the Conservatives wanted it to be on, which was who is best prepared to deal with Trump. As has been discussed here, I mean, incumbents are faring well in that conversation around the world. People are turning to those that are currently in office as the preferred choice to deal with a turbulent moment where instability feels like a second-by-second occurrence, and they're not really interested in changing horses. And I really think that's the question tomorrow is less about, for a lot of voters, is less about who's best to deal with Trump. It's more, do you want change right now, or is the status quo fine? And to Jamie's point earlier, it's been not a very high level of engagement in the public conversation with voters in this election. It does feel a bit like something that's passed by without a lot of notice to a lot of people. And so I think there will probably be record low turnout and probably not a lot of interest in changing the government. I think the opposition parties couldn't try and play on the Trump turf that Ford wanted them on. They had to find other issues. And I think the Liberals have done the best job of that. And it's probably why they will fare decently well tomorrow. They focus this election conversation on healthcare, which, according to all public opinion polls in terms of issues, is a top concern for Ontario voters and something that for a lot of voters, they tend to associate with strong Liberal management as opposed to Conservative management. So I think it was a smart issue for them to play on. Seems to be working for them. They were never going to come into this in a snap election environment a year and a half early and on the other end form government. So I think they'll see a pretty decent result. And there's a certain poetic justice as an Ontario Liberal in Doug Ford calling an early election and it leading to the rebirth of the Ontario Liberal Party.
Do you think, I guess, Hannah, I'll give the last word to you. Do you think it will lead to the rebirth? Like, what are you watching for as far as the stakes for each of the parties tomorrow?
Yeah, just to pick up on something that everybody's been talking about, when it comes to the opposition parties not talking about Donald Trump and kind of ceding that to Doug Ford, I think what they're showing there is the fact that they didn't feel that they could potentially win this election, that he really did have it in the bag, because that was the issue of the day. And it doesn't have to do just with, you know, who's best to tackle. I mean, because it's a federal government that will basically tackle the next, who will tackle the president of the United States. But by, you know, there's a lot of jobs that are at stake in Ontario. The auto industry is there. They could have found ways to dig into that issue with Doug Ford if they really felt that they could have a chance up against him. I do agree that when it comes to the opposition parties, in particular the Liberal Party, getting official party status was a big thing. And to do that, you want to try to take some of the votes away from the NDP. We saw it from the leader in the debates, you know, pleading with NDP voters to come vote Liberal. And then also when you talk about the healthcare issue, that's something that really the Liberals and the NDP are best positioned to talk and tackle when it comes to Ontarians. So tomorrow, yes, I will be looking to see how Bonnie Crombie does and if she does reestablish that official party status. And, you know, by doing these different tactics on the campaign trail, she has a better shot than potentially going after Doug Ford and, you know, not focusing on trying to get the seat count up so they can have more money when it comes to official party status, more time in the legislature. So it will be a good election to watch in that sense.
It feels like the start of maybe an election season. Thanks, everyone. Thanks to our front bench. I really appreciate the discussion today.